All right, let's jump right into a really profound paradox. How exactly do seemingly normal, everyday, law-abiding citizens end up committing completely unimaginable atrocities? It's a question that has haunted history for generations. And the answer? Well, it isn't just that the world is full of monsters. The truth, as political theorist Hannah Arendt so brilliantly pointed out, is actually much more complex. It's heavily rooted in the very way human beings are biologically and socially wired to interact with systems.
So, welcome to today's Explainer. We are taking a serious, documentary-style look into the deep psychological mechanisms that cause ordinary people to obey destructive authority. We're going to examine the very architecture of human compliance to understand how collective harm actually happens. Because, as you'll see, this isn't just stuff locked away in history books, it's a latent potential sitting inside every single one of us.
Here is our agenda for today. 1. The banality of evil. 2. The pull of authority. 3. The pressure to conform. 4. Mechanisms of moral disengagement. 5. Dehumanization in the system. And finally, 6. Obedience in modern society.
Section 1. The banality of evil, bureaucracy, and documentation. Hannah Arendt actually coined this phrase while she was observing the trial of Adolf Eichmann, one of the key administrative architects of the Holocaust. Think about Adolf Eichmann for a second. The truly terrifying realization about him was that he didn't present himself as some psychopathic, bloodthirsty villain. Actually, he presented as a diligent, boring bureaucrat. He claimed he was simply doing his duty, you know? He was way more concerned with optimizing transport schedules and filing paperwork than with the horrific moral reality of what he was doing. In his own mind, he was just a tiny cog in a massive machine. It just goes to show how a well-designed system can completely, coldly alienate a person from the real-world consequences of their daily work.
Section 2. The pull of authority, the Milgram Experiment. To really understand how we act when a direct superior barks an order, we have to travel back to Yale University in the 1960s. Picture this. Participants are instructed by a stern, unsmiling man in a lab coat to deliver increasingly powerful electric shocks to a learner in another room every single time they get a question wrong. Now, before the experiment even started, psychiatric experts were asked to predict the outcome. They guessed that maybe 1 to 3% of people, basically only those with severe psychological issues, would administer the maximum potentially lethal shocks. But the actual results? A whopping 65% of perfectly ordinary people went all the way to the end. No way, right?
It's wild, and it brilliantly illustrates a terrifying reality about human nature. These participants heard agonized screams. They heard the learner begging, literally begging to be let out. The participants themselves were visibly stressed out, sweating, trembling, biting their lips. Yet the stark presence of authority totally overpowered their strongest moral instincts against hurting somebody else. They simply couldn't find the internal willpower to look the man in the lab coat in the eye and say, no.
So why on earth does this happen? Stanley Milgram proposed that humans can incredibly easily slip into what he called the agentic state. Basically, the moment we step into a hierarchy, a switch flips in our brain. We stop viewing ourselves as the authors of our own actions, and we become mere agents of the authority figure. By telling ourselves, hey, I was just following orders, we allow the authority to completely absorb our own personal moral burden.
But, modern reinterpretations of Milgram's archives reveal a second, perhaps even deeper layer to this whole thing. Destructive obedience isn't always just blind, terrifying compliance. People are actually especially obedient when they strongly identify with the leader's core purpose. A lot of those participants truly believed they were contributing to a vital, noble scientific mission. Psychologists call this engaged followership, meaning people will cross immense, unthinkable moral boundaries if they're convinced they are serving a higher good.
Section 3. The pressure to conform, the group and the individual. Okay, so we've looked at the vertical pressure from authority figures above us. Now let's explore the horizontal pressure coming from the peers standing right next to us. Psychologist Solomon Asch demonstrated this perfectly in the 1950s. He put a single, unsuspecting participant in a room full of actors. Their task? Matching the lengths of lines on a board. An incredibly simple, painfully obvious task. But the actors were secretly instructed to unanimously give the completely wrong answer. Astonishingly, 75% of the real participants conformed to the clearly incorrect majority at least once. They knew perfectly well their eyes weren't lying to them, but they succumbed to normative social influence. They literally chose to be wrong rather than face the awkwardness and disapproval of the pack.
Let's put these two concepts side by side to really cement how this works. Asch showed us conformity, that implicit horizontal pressure from our peers. Milgram, on the other hand, showed us obedience, the explicit vertical demands from a boss or authority figure. But here is the kicker. Both of these mechanisms do the exact same thing. They lead us to completely suppress our true moral or factual perceptions just so we can survive within our social structure.
And when that peer pressure really cranks up, it creates what psychologists call groupthink. This is a super dangerous phenomenon where the overwhelming desire to just keep the peace completely eliminates critical thinking. People start self-censoring, they squash any dissenting opinions. And when a group stews in its own internal propaganda for long enough, they develop this illusion of invulnerability and an unquestioning, rock-solid belief in their own moral correctness.
Section 4. Mechanisms of moral disengagement. All right, we are going to shift gears from external pressures to the internal shifts that happen inside our brains. How do we protect ourselves from crippling guilt when we actively participate in doing harm? For that, we turn to the incredible work of psychologist Albert Bandura.
Bandura identified these specific mental gymnastics. He called them mechanisms of moral disengagement that people use to basically hit the mute button on their internal moral compass. We've already touched on displacement of responsibility, blaming the boss, but let's look closer at how we cognitively restructure the harmful acts themselves to feel okay about them.
Look at how massive of a role language plays here. By camouflaging terrible activities with innocent, clinical, or highly bureaucratic euphemisms, the actions entirely lose their repugnancy. We don't say kill, we say neutralize. We don't say civilian deaths, we say collateral damage. Language is literally the loophole that allows the human brain to completely bypass its hardwired empathy.
Now let's zoom out and see how this scales into a broader system through the diffusion of responsibility. Thanks to the division of labor, a massive bureaucracy can collectively inflict staggering harm because no single individual feels the true weight of the moral burden. Think about it. You just drove the train. You just filed the paperwork. You just wrote the code. When the responsibility is spread out over thousands of people, personal guilt just completely evaporates. Like Bandura said, if everyone is responsible, no one really feels responsible.
Section 5. Dehumanization and the system. Building on Bandura's mechanisms, we absolutely have to look at what is, without a doubt, the most dangerous tool for enabling violence: dehumanization.
Dehumanization effectively strips the target of their moral worth. You have animalistic dehumanization, which likens groups to pests or vermin to trigger a visceral feeling of disgust. Then there's mechanistic dehumanization, which treats people like unfeeling robots or literal objects. By categorizing an enemy as subhuman, our brain's natural biological empathetic inhibition against harming a fellow human is entirely disabled. In your mind, you are no longer harming a person, you're just solving a pest problem or removing an obstacle.
Section 6. Obedience in modern society. For our final section, let's bring this all the way up to the present day and see how these exact same psychological forces are actively building the reality of our modern world.
Now, you might be thinking, sure, this makes sense, but it's locked away in history books or it's just relegated to mid-century psychology labs with guys in lab coats. We really have to ask ourselves, are we actually immune to this today?
Spoiler alert, the data suggests we absolutely are not. We see these exact design features everywhere in our daily lives right now. We see intense normative conformity thriving inside social media echo chambers, often fueled by algorithmic propaganda, where we'll agree with the mob just to avoid being socially exiled. We see employees blindly following corporate directives that completely contradict their personal ethics just because the boss said so. We see online anonymity causing de-individuation, giving people the cover to harass others ruthlessly without a single shred of empathy.
Here is the absolute most vital takeaway from all of this research. From Arendt, Milgram, Ash, and Bandura, these are not inherently villainous traits. They are human design features. We evolved to survive in groups. We are literally wired to follow, to belong, and to seek the safety of the hierarchy. Ordinary people absolutely can and frequently do participate in harm if you put them under the right systemic pressures.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a deeply personal reflection on moral courage. The only real defenses we have against these monumental forces are awareness, critical thinking, and the sheer willingness to stand out from the crowd. So the very next time a system, a peer group, or even an algorithm demands your unquestioning obedience, what will you do?